The crystal chandeliers in the grand hall of the Sterling estate cast a cold, unforgiving light. Nash, wearing a faded flannel shirt covered in fine sawdust, knelt beside a breathtaking $2 million grand piano. With a remarkably gentle touch, his calloused hands used a soft cloth to wipe away the faint layer of construction dust he had accidentally left behind. Clinging tightly to his leg was little Jet, his 6-year-old autistic son, trembling at the sheer size of the room. Suddenly, the sharp echo of a toolbox crashing across the marble floor shattered the silence. Wrenches and screwdrivers scattered everywhere. "Get your filthy hands off my piano." Eve, the billionaire CEO, descended the grand staircase in a flawless, plunging V-neck crimson gown, her face twisted in absolute disgust as she glared down at the poor carpenter. "I was just cleaning the dust, ma'am," Nash said quietly, instinctively shielding Jet behind him. "You couldn't pay for a single key on that instrument if you worked your entire pathetic life." Eve's voice echoed with lethal cruelty, drawing the stares of her wealthy staff. "Get this trash out the back door before I call the police for attempted theft." The heavy service door slammed shut behind them, cutting off the golden warmth and the faint, elegant clinking of crystal from the grand hall. Instantly, the freezing winter wind bit through Nash's thin, faded denim jacket. The alley behind the Sterling estate was a dark, icy corridor, a stark contrast to the billionaire's paradise they had just been thrown out of. Nash's heavy work boots, heavily scuffed and separating at the seams where the steel toe peeked through, crunched softly against the frozen gravel. He looked down at his own hands. The knuckles were raw, cracked, and bleeding slightly from the biting wind, deeply embedded with wood glue and sawdust that no amount of scrubbing could wash away. They were the calloused hands of a man who worked punishing 16-hour shifts, sanding floors, repairing cabinets, and taking any odd manual job he could find just to keep the heat on in their cramped, drafty apartment. Beside him, little Jet was shivering violently, his small hands clamped tightly over his ears. The abrupt, vicious shouting from the CEO had overwhelmed the boy's fragile senses. Nash immediately dropped to his knees, right in the snow, ignoring the freezing moisture seeping through his jeans. He gently pulled Jet's hands away from his ears, wrapping his large, rough hands around the boy's small ones to warm them, and pulled Jet's worn-out woolen beanie down snugly. "You're safe now, buddy. The loud noise is all gone," Nash whispered, his breath pluming in the freezing air. Jet didn't speak. He rarely did. Ever since his mother passed away 3 years ago, the world had become too loud, too chaotic, and too terrifying for his autistic mind to process. The only thing that ever truly grounded the boy, the only magic that could calm the terrifying storms in his head, was the sound of a piano. That was the only reason Nash had brought him to the mansion today, hoping to let the boy hear the beautiful instrument while he fixed the drawing room cabinets. Instead, they had been treated like garbage. Nash reached into the deep pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small, slightly squashed sweet bun wrapped in crinkled plastic. It was the only food he had managed to buy with his last few crumpled dollar bills. He carefully unwrapped it and placed it in Jet's small, trembling hands. "Here you go, Jet. Eat up, okay?" Jet took a small bite, and some of the tension finally left his little shoulders. Nash's own stomach gave a hollow, painful ache of hunger, but he simply smiled, brushing a stray wood shaving from his son's hair. Nash swallowed the bitter taste of humiliation that still burned in his throat. Being called trash, being threatened with the police, it gnawed at his dignity. But pride was a luxury a poor single father could not afford. He traded his pride, his sleep, and his physical health every single day to pay for Jet's specialized therapy bills. He would let the world spit on him, mock him, and tear him down 1,000 times over, as long as it meant he could protect his son's fragile universe. Nash stood up, hoisting Jet onto his broad shoulders to keep the boy's worn-out sneakers out of the biting snow. "Let's go home, Jet," he murmured, stepping forward into the unforgiving winter night, carrying his entire world on his back. While the freezing wind howled outside, the atmosphere inside the Sterling estate was a suffocating blend of expensive perfume and high-stakes tension. The Grand Hall had been transformed into a breathtaking venue for Eve's highly anticipated $50 million charity gala. The room was packed with the city's most ruthless billionaires, elite investors, and predatory journalists. For Eve, this was not merely a party, it was a desperate battle for survival. Her company's stock had been hemorrhaging for months, and securing the massive investment fund from these VIPs tonight was the only thing keeping her empire from collapsing. The centerpiece of the evening, the hook that had drawn the wealthiest tycoons to her estate, was a promised performance on the $2 million grand piano. The guest of honor was supposed to be Maestro Julian, a notoriously arrogant A-list pianist, scheduled to play a fiendishly complex classical sonata that the lead investor absolutely adored. Eve stood near the sweeping staircase, forcing a flawless, practiced smile as she clinked her champagne flute with an influential tycoon. But beneath her calm facade, her heart was hammering painfully against her ribs. It was already 30 minutes past the scheduled performance time, and the piano remained glaringly empty. Suddenly, her event manager, the same sneering man who had thrown Nash's toolbox across the floor earlier, pushed his way through the crowd. His face was slick with panicked sweat, completely drained of its earlier arrogance. He leaned in, his voice trembling in a frantic whisper. "Miss Sterling, he's gone." Eve's practiced smile froze. "What do you mean gone?" "Julian walked out," the manager stammered, wiping his forehead with a shaking hand. "He threw a tantrum over a minor clause in his performance contract, demanded double his fee in cash, and when I told him to wait, he got in his limousine and drove off. He left us, Miss Sterling. He's not coming back." The blood drained from Eve's face. The grand hall suddenly felt entirely too small. She looked across the room and locked eyes with Arthur Vance, the lead investor holding the key to a lifeline for her company. Arthur was tapping his gold Rolex, his expression souring into a scowl with every passing second. Beside him, two journalists from a major financial network were already whispering to each other, smelling blood in the water. "Find a replacement?" Eve hissed, her voice dropping to a lethal, desperate pitch. "Call the symphony, call the conservatory, pay them whatever they want. Get someone in that seat now." "I tried," the manager pleaded, looking like he might cry. "I called everyone." But the sonata Arthur requested. It's a masterpiece of extreme technical difficulty. No one in the city can play it flawlessly on zero notice. We have an empty stage and a room full of people waiting to watch you fail. Eve stared at the magnificent, silent piano. Her father's legacy, her entire life's work, was about to be burned to ashes in front of the world's elite. She was surrounded by unimaginable wealth, yet she had never felt more helpless. Total, inescapable humiliation was only seconds away. Outside, in the freezing alley, the muffled sounds of the gala suddenly shifted. The heavy service door was cracked open by a panicking waiter rushing out for a smoke, letting the chaotic, echoing noise of 100 frantic, wealthy voices spill into the quiet winter night. For little Jet, the sudden wave of overlapping, harsh sounds was like a physical blow. He dropped his half-eaten bun, clamped both hands over his ears, and began to rock back and forth, letting out a high, distressed whimper. Nash dropped to his knees, wrapping his arms around the trembling boy. "Jet, look at me." "It's okay," he pleaded, but the sensory overload had already taken hold. Jet's eyes were squeezed shut in pure terror, his breathing shallow and rapid. Nash knew this state. He knew that once the storm in Jet's mind began, only one thing could anchor him back to reality: the steady, beautiful mathematics of classical music. Nash looked at the cracked service door. He thought of the $2 million piano sitting abandoned under the chandeliers. He knew the vicious humiliation waiting for him inside, but looking at his son's tear-streaked face, the choice was non-existent. He stood up, lifted Jet into his arms, and kicked the heavy door wide open. The sudden appearance of the poor carpenter silenced the immediate vicinity. Nash marched directly through the sea of Armani tuxedos and designer gowns, his scuffed steel-toe boots leaving faint, wet tracks of melting snow and sawdust across the pristine marble floor. You! The event manager's face turned a violent shade of purple as he lunged forward. I told you to get out! Security! Throw this trash out! Quiet, Nash said. He didn't shout, but the absolute crushing authority in his low voice made the manager freeze mid-step. Eve Sterling stepped forward from the crowd, her eyes blazing with fury, her hand raised to summon her guards. But Nash didn't even look at the billionaire CEO. He walked straight past the gaping tycoons and approached the magnificent grand piano. He gently set Jet down on the plush carpet right next to the polished wooden leg of the instrument. Just listen to the keys, buddy. Nash whispered, brushing a tear from the boy's cheek. Just the keys. Nash sat down on the velvet bench. He closed his eyes, taking a single, deep breath. His rough, cracked hands that had spent years sanding floors and breaking under the weight of poverty, hovered over the pristine ivory keys. Then, he brought them down. He didn't just play a simple lullaby. He launched directly into the exact, fiendishly complex sonata that the lead investor had requested. The notes exploded from the piano with terrifying precision and raw, unbridled power. His calloused fingers flew across the keys with the speed and grace of a phantom, weaving a melody so hauntingly beautiful, so desperately sad and yet triumphant that it seemed to bend the very air in the room. The grand hall instantly fell into a stunned, breathless silence. Champagne flutes hovered inches from mouths. The furious manager stood rooted to the floor, his jaw slacked. Eve Sterling's furious expression melted into pure, paralyzed shock. By the bench, Jet slowly lowered his hands from his ears. The panic washed away from his small face, replaced by a soft, peaceful smile as he watched his father's hands dance. For that moment, Nash wasn't a poor carpenter in a faded jacket. He was a king holding court, and the $2 million instrument was bending entirely to his will. The final, haunting chord of the sonata hung in the air, vibrating through the crystal chandeliers before slowly fading into absolute, breathless silence. For a long, agonizing moment, no one in the grand hall dared to move. The billionaires, the ruthless investors, the predatory journalists, they were all entirely paralyzed, stripped of their arrogance by the sheer, devastating beauty of what they had just witnessed. Then, the sound of shattering glass broke the spell. Arthur Vance, the lead investor, whose money Eve desperately needed, had dropped his champagne flute. He didn't seem to notice the shards at his feet. He was staring at the man in the faded denim jacket, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and profound reverence. He took a slow, trembling step forward from the crowd. It cannot be, Arthur whispered, his voice carrying clearly through the deadly quiet room. I attended your final concert in Vienna 5 years ago. They said you had disappeared off the face of the earth. But it's you, Julian Nash, the greatest piano prodigy of our generation. A collective gasp ripped through the elite crowd. The wealthy tycoons began whispering frantically to one another. The Julian Nash? The maestro, who had rejected multi-million-dollar contracts to simply vanish without a trace? Nash gently closed the polished lid over the ivory keys. He didn't look at the whispering crowd. He looked down at Jet, who was now smiling, his small fingers tracing the wood grain of the piano bench. Nash looked at his own hands that had once been insured for millions, now cracked, permanently calloused, and deeply embedded with wood glue. I used to be, Nash said quietly, his voice steady and unapologetic. But 5 years ago, my wife passed away. The world became too loud and terrifying for my son, and the international concert tours kept me thousands of miles away from the only person who needed me. The stages, the applause, the millions of dollars. None of it could hold my boy's hand when he was terrified in the dark. Nash reached down, gently running his rough hand over Jet's woolen beanie. So, I traded the grand pianos for sawdust and hammers. Jet didn't need a legend on a stage. He needed a father. The raw, unflinching honesty of his sacrifice hit the room like a physical blow. Several wealthy women in the crowd lifted hands to their mouths, tears ruining their expensive makeup. The event manager, his face pale and sweating profusely, tried to salvage his ruined authority. This is absurd. he stammered, stepping toward them, his voice shrill. He's just a dirty carpenter. Security! Get this lying trash out of here right now. Smack. The sound of the slap echoed like a gunshot. Eve Sterling stood over the manager, her chest heaving, her eyes blazing with a lethal, absolute fury. Her hand was still raised. Pack your things and get out of my house, Eve commanded, her voice dropping to a terrifying, icy whisper. You are fired. And if I ever see you disrespect this man or his child again, I will personally ensure you never work in this city for the rest of your miserable life. The manager backed away, trembling under the terrifying glare of the CEO, before turning and fleeing the hall in total disgrace. Eve turned back to Nash. The cold, untouchable mask she had worn for years was entirely gone, shattered by the profound weight of a father's pure love. She looked at his scuffed, steel-toe boots, his bleeding knuckles, and the faded jacket he wore like royal armor. Tears spilled over her eyelashes, ruining her flawless facade. Slowly, ignoring the shocked gasps of the city's elite, the billionaire heiress sank to her knees in her $10,000 crimson gown. She knelt right on the cold marble floor, placing herself at eye level with little Jet, and then looked up at Nash. I am so deeply, deeply sorry. Eve wept, her voice cracking with raw emotion. I evaluated you by the dirt on your clothes, and I was entirely blind to the giant standing in front of me. Please, forgive me.
That moment when Eve dropped to her knees in her $10,000 gown in front of a poor carpenter is something I will never forget. It is a powerful reminder that we should never judge a book by its cover. We live in a world that often measures a person's worth by the price tag on their clothes or the title on their business card. But as we saw tonight, a father's love is the greatest wealth of all. Nash walked away from global fame, sold out arenas, and millions of dollars, choosing a life of grueling labor and poverty simply because his son needed him. That silent, uncomplaining sacrifice is the true mark of a king. And let's talk about karma, because it always has a perfect sense of timing. The arrogant manager who believed he could cruelly step on a poor man and his disabled son was instantly stripped of his power and humiliated in front of the city's elite. What you put out into the universe always comes back to you. Eve was given a chance at redemption only because she was brave enough to let go of her ego, admit her terrible mistake, and show genuine respect to a man she had once called trash. While this cinematic tale is a work of fiction, the quiet devotion, profound love, and daily sacrifices of single fathers everywhere are absolutely real. If you believe that true heroes don't wear capes, but instead wear faded jackets and scuffed boots to protect their children, type the word karma in the comments below. Or better yet, share a beautiful memory of your own father with us. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more life-changing stories. Until next time, stay kind,